All right, so here we go. So printing, Jiffy Print needs to produce 3,200 error-free copies of a brochure. For this type of a run, there's usually a 1.5% spoilage rate. What is the minimum number of brochures to get 3,200 good copies? What are they talking about? What do they mean by spoilage rate?
I'm guessing that maybe 1.5 of them don't really come out good, or they might be like errored or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. They're wrecked, right? 1.5% are wrecked, aren't they? So therefore, are they going to need to start, if they want to get 3,200 good copies in the end, they're going to need to start with more than 3,200, aren't they? And then 1.5% will get wrecked, and then they'll have 3,200 good copies in the end. So how are we going to do this? Well, you know what I'm going to suggest? Start with 100 copies. Now you think, no, but that's not what they, yeah, but again, I'm just guessing, right? Just to see the pattern, and that'll help. So if you started with 100 copies and 1.5% spoiled, so starting with 100 copies, and then you spoil 1.5%, what would you do? How would you find out how many you have left?
You would multiply the 1.5%, and then whatever you get from that product, you add on to the initial start, or which would be the 100.
So I got to take 100 times 0.015. I got to make it a decimal. And that's going to be 1.5. And then what do I do with that 1.5?
You then add that to, or you multiply that by, or no, I'm sorry, you add that to the
Remember, it's spoiled. That means you're wrecked.
You subtract from 100?
Right. We need to subtract it from 100, right? Is everybody seeing that? If you started with 100 copies and 1.5% or 0.015 decimal are wrecked, that means 1.5, 1.5 of your copies gets wrecked. So then 100 minus 1.5 gives you, what's that, 98.5 good copies, right? We need to subtract that, don't we? Because that number gets wrecked. We'd have 98.5 good copies left. Now, rather than put 1.5 there, put this there, right? Because that is the 1.5. That's where the 1.5 came from. Because remember what you want to see. You want to see the pattern in the work. I really don't care about what the answer is because we didn't really start with 100 copies. I'm just doing this to see the pattern so I know how to solve the problem. So if we started with 100 copies, then we would take 100 minus 0.015 times 100 to get the number of good copies left. So do you see the pattern? Now just do that same thing, except instead of starting with 100 copies, we start with X because we don't know. We don't know how many copies we started with. Minus X. See, the 100 is the X times 0.015 equals, and what are the number of good copies we need in the end? In my problem, it's 3,200. Right? 3,200 good copies. Does everybody see that? I just observed what we did with 100 because we think better with nice, easy, real life numbers than we do with an X or with really ugly numbers. So I just say start with 100. What would you do with 100? You would take the 100 copies minus 0.015 times the 100 copies that get wrecked. And that would leave you with 98.5 good copies. We'll do the same thing with an X. Take X, which is your starting amount, minus 0.015 times X, right? You got to use the X twice, just like we used the 100 twice. And that'll give you the number of good copies, which we need that number to be 3,200. Good. Now, how do we solve this for X. Remember what we learned? There's a 1 here, right? There's an invisible 1. X alone is 1X. So if you subtract these, 1X, take away 0.015X, use your calculator. 1 minus 0.015 is 0.985. So we get 0.985X is 3,200. Last step. Divide by 0.985. And you get X equals, what is that? 3248.73, blah, blah, blah. Now, I want to point out, what if, I'm going to pretend this came out 0.1. It really came out 0.73. But I want to show you, even if it came out 0.1, we are going to round up. Round up. We're going to round up our answer. Even if it was 0.1, I'm going to round up. Why? Well, because first off, they said it right here. They said round up your answer to the nearest whole number. But also, I want you to see that that makes sense in real life. Why? Because our answer, 3248, that's how many we must start with. We must start with 3248.1 copies. And then some are going to get wrecked, and we'll end up with 3,200 good copies, right? That's what we're concluding. Well, how do you start with 3248.1? You can't. So you have to round that up. Does that make sense? It's not a math thing, it's a real life thing. You can't start with 0.1, 3248.1. And you say, well, yeah, but it would round to 3248. Well, if you start with 3248, you're going to come out with too few, right? You need exactly 3248.1. If you go under that, you're not going to have 3,200 good copies in the end. So you have to go above it, even if it's only 0.1. Does that make sense? You've got to round it up. If you just do 3248 straight on, you're not going to have enough good copies in the end. You need 3,200 good copies in. So you've got to round it up in the end.